My name is Jim McCreary. I'm the founder and CEO of Talento Total. We're an international nonprofit organization, and we support Afro-descendant and indigenous young professionals along their professional journey to change the leadership and diversity landscape, not only here in Latin America today, but globally around the world. And what we're going to dive into today has a lot to do with the work that I've done over the years and kind of going back to data, especially being a gringo here in Brazil and LATAM for the last 10 years. I moved here to Brazil in 2014, and I have been between Brazil and Colombia since then for roughly 10 years. And I've learned a lot. I've seen a lot. And one of the things that I had to do as an early entrepreneur here in Brazil, not being Brazilian, not being raised in this environment, not having the expertise to speak with authenticity that many of you do, you all have the ability to do, I really had to have a different approach. And that approach was kind of led by numbers, using numbers. So instead of saying, hey, why is everyone at, this elite shopping mall, Shopping Leblon, or, pick your fanciest mall in Brazil, why is everyone here white? Right? And why is everyone picking up trash and, in service jobs, black? Why is everyone in this neighborhood that we're very close to, Leblon, white? And why is everyone in Vidigal, where we went to have a good time the other night, black? And so those kind of direct questions coming from a foreigner don't always land well. Even coming here 20 years ago, I remember driving from the airport to Zona Sul and seeing a sign that said, "Gringo, go home." I was like, okay, all right. So being a gringo and, being a guest in someone else's country, it's very good to be respectful. And so I had to change that to ask questions. And so instead of me talking, it was more of me listening. And so what I do now as the CEO of Talento Total is I kind of present this data. And I think some of this came from the Inter-American Development Bank, Instituto Ethos, with their study on the 500 largest companies in Brazil. And this was the first time that data was actually captured that was able to clearly demonstrate the lack of diversity along racial and ethnic lines, but also how stark and drastic these disparities were. And so, as we probably have learned by now, 56% of the Brazilian population is Afro-descendant or Afro-Brazilian, black. Now, there is some nuance to that, and that nuance revolves around how we identify. And there's a very different context in Brazil from the United States. So I am what you would call light skinned in the United States. I am black. It is actually written on my birth certificate with a B for black. There was no choice there. And I have first cousins who are the color of the inside of my palm. And they're also black, like very black here, right? And legally to a certain extent. But in LATAM, both Colombia, Brazil, the Dominican Republic, you often have the opportunity to choose how you identify. And if you're not proud of being black, you don't come from a family where that is espoused, and you are encouraged to identify as such, it probably may not be in your best interest from a socioeconomic standpoint to declare yourself as black. If you get a better job because you say you're white, I can't argue against that, right? Because we all have to survive. So some of the data that I just mentioned, 56% of the Brazilian population, conservatively speaking, is black. And at the 500 largest companies in Brazil, 6.3% of middle management is black. And 4.7% of executive leaders are black. And we just heard, for those of you all who were in the session with Oscar Decotelli, he mentioned that they're on the B3 or the Bovespa, which is their listed companies. There's only one black CEO, and she is the CEO of Banco do Brasil. So it's a political appointment. So essentially none, right? And the work that we do is to try to find talent and provide them with the resources so that they can access the educational opportunities, but maybe more importantly, the networks that then lead to access just as much as the education does. And so kind of taking that same notion of using data, I would often ask, okay, I'm not American. I'm not Brazilian. I'm trying to learn. Why? Why is 56% of the population black, but only 4.7% of executive leaders are black? I don't know. I'm stupid. I just got here yesterday. So you explain. And then that's when the real magic happens, because we have to use our thinking caps and start to really dive into root causes of these problems. And so kind of taking that same approach, we want to, before we get this discussion started, we want to dive into some data, particularly that revolves around the investment and venture capital industry that was spoken of or spoken about in our last session not too long ago, just before our break. And so there's a quote here from Peter Thiel. I'm not a Peter Thiel fan per se, but if someone says something that is correct, I have to agree with it, no matter where the message comes from. So he says, the single most powerful pattern I have noticed is that successful people find value in unexpected places. And oftentimes there's a lot of value in black spaces and indigenous spaces. And it's kind of our job to find that and give them the opportunities. So in 2021, venture capital investors, and venture capital is a form of private equity, primarily from the United States, deployed $15.9 billion, not pesos, not reais, dollars to Latin America. The following year, venture capital investors deployed US $7.8 billion across a record 1,114 deals. This is the second largest asset class in Latin America as a proportion of total private capital invested. And how many or how much of those dollars do you think went to black and indigenous founders who make up more than 56%? Effectively, kind of zero. You got it, right? Zero. So when we look at the amount of money that's flowing into Latin America, we also have to consider one other thing, context, right? Going back to how I am unable to opt out of my blackness as an American and how we identify who is black, who is white in our respective countries. So I know we have some Colombians in the building, but has anyone heard of Sofia Vergara? The new Netflix series, not to use that as an example, but Griselda and, she's worldwide famous. In America, and I'm from South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, she's a Latina. In Colombia, what is she? Rana, she's white. She's white. So when you understand that context, you can essentially say that $15.9 billion went to white founders in Latin America over the past 2 or 3 years, or more than that, right? 15.9 plus, I think the other 6.8, more than $20 billion flowed into Latin America, and none of it went to us. None of it. And one other caveat before we kind of jump into a series of questions that I'll present to our panelists is that a lot of the founders of these companies, often unicorns, and there are a large number of unicorns. I think there are 17 unicorns in Brazil. Unicorns are considered private companies with a valuation of more than $1 billion US. There are 17 in Brazil. There are 4 in Colombia. And when we look at who gets that money, it's oftentimes founders, white Latino founders, who have graduated from top US universities. The Chicago Booths, the Stanfords, the Harvards, because there's a trust factor when you can say someone is your classmate, even though they come from a completely different cultural context with different regulatory environments. But we went to the same school. There's no one else I can trust more than you. I've never been to your country. Here's $1 billion. So, dive into these questions because here we are. One of the things that I would also mention just before we get started with our panelists is that we also represent different generations, right? Chris is a few years ahead of me, so is Luana, but Leo is the youngest one on the panel. And he recently interviewed for the full-time MBA programs at Duke, Fuqua, also Stanford, GSB, and Chicago Booth. And the last one is Kellogg, correct? So he could very much be on his way to one of these top business schools as an Afro-Brazilian. And that would be one more box checked for him to kind of gain the favor of investors because he has that connection to the schools. But I think this first question, I'll start with Mr. Spikes, Chris, because you are someone who has received funding and you know how to raise money. You're a part of the network. You came here to Brazil between Bain and Groupon, but Groupon is a very big story because they were one of the early US-based or international investors that put a lot of money into Brazil. So can you talk about your experience, but also which entrepreneurs receive funding and how is that funding tied to access to elite education and exclusive networks in the United States and Europe? And this is from the perspective of a Latin American founder. So a founder from Brazil, Colombia, Peru, etc.
Yeah. So hello, everybody. Glad to be here with you guys. So I'm going to start answering your question with the Groupon experience I had, because Groupon actually was founded in Brazil by Rocket Internet, which is a German incubator fund that does kind of clones of companies. And, you know, they're in 40 countries before the USA company thinks about expanding. They want to sell to them. So I actually interviewed with the German Salmer brothers. Oliver was there. And I can tell you for sure, thinking about what does an elite school do for you? What do these institutions like whatever McKinsey, Bain does for you? So when I did the interview with Oliver, it was a 20-minute interview. He asked me about 3 or 4 questions, and then he said, Siemens, Chicago, Bain, you can do this job. It was seriously like 3 questions. I answered them correctly, basically. And it's like, he just basically took the resume and pushed it aside. It's like, you want to be an entrepreneur. How close did you get to be an entrepreneur at Siemens? How much closer did you get working at Bain? He's like, you're 30 something years old right now. If you don't start right now and do this, like you're going to have a family, you're going to do this and that. He's like, the time is now. Of course, he was overselling. You're going to be the CEO, you know, like, but I was a managing director there, but like it was a sell, but also it was very true that I could not have, and I didn't, and they were like, do you speak Portuguese? I was like, kind of. They're like, well, you have to speak Portuguese to be the director here. I was like, don't worry, I'll have it in 3 months. And we did the interview in English, and they still contracted me to be the managing director of Groupon Brazil on the promise that I was going to speak Portuguese in 3 months. Because I went to Bain and worked in Chicago and things like that, right? So this is like one of the first moments I was like, wow. I was like, that was pretty powerful actually to be able to get that. And now as a founder, when I started my company, I first pulled on my immediate network, basically, right? I looked at Bain in Chicago. So, and I'll get to your second part of your question in a second here about institutional investment, but I'm kind of working from like, you know, from getting a job, like that's outside of your completely network, basically, to be able to get, and then going to your network, basically, to get funding. So, when I started the company, Authon, that he spoke about, I had to make a decision. I was like, well, I need to get sales, but I don't have money, but we need to get sales before I get funding. So this is probably not the best idea, right? But I like purchased clothes and we were selling and I didn't have the money to pay for it. So I went to the United States to Bain. I asked the secretary at Bain to Texas where I worked at. And I said, hey, can you reserve a room for me for 2 weeks for a manager's room? And I literally interviewed every single manager and partner at Bain, Texas, until I left with $300,000 of investment to be able to come back as a seed money. So I would say 2/3 of the people there I didn't work with, right? They just, because, you know, you went there and like, of course you have to do well while you're there too, right? And they just asked people around like, okay, this guy's a guy worth investing in. Actually, one of the partners, a major ones there, he's like, Chris, I've invested in about 5 of these startups. He's like, I've never made money on one of them. I want you to be the first, basically, right? And this is one of the guys that everyone's scared of there also too, right? The main partner. So that, and also my Chicago network, right? The people I went to school with that, you know, we just enjoyed our time together. We spoke about business, things like that, but there weren't even people that were even recruiting for consulting with me, but people that I just knew through contacts in general. So again, this kind of elite network is very important, basically, right? Again, from people that you do know, people that you don't know, actually, right? So it's very important. So the last part, what you spoke about is kind of institutional investment. So right now we got into we're 8 years into the company and we're growing over 70% per year. It's going well. I haven't had the need to go for institutional investment yet, but we're going to go to institutional investment starting in 2025. But I already did some initial conversations. I did like a tour, basically like a road show in the United States to New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And it's amazing the audiences you get with what you have on your resume too, right? So not only the people that you know, like, everyone from Chicago and Maine, basically, that you can get contacts to get in front of people, but also just you get the audience. Of course, it's up to you to win once you get in there, right? Just having it on the resume doesn't allow you to get the money, actually, right? But I think part of the major problem is that there just needs to be more people like us in these institutions that are large, and that's what Gem is doing here with Talento Total, because that's it's a pipeline, basically, right? So it's all a game of numbers here. So I think that's, and I think I touched the points in terms of my point of view and kind of my experience here is where I'm at in terms of that. So like each kind of point of that journey, I've experienced very positive things along the way, right? Because of that network.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Luana, we'll go to you next. And what I really want to do, because we have a lot of Black women from Latin America here, and you're looking at 4 crazy people. And I say that because we're all entrepreneurs. And you have to be crazy, as it is often said, to start your own company and leave a good job. Leave a good job and start a company. Absolutely insane to do that because it is an arduous road. But I think, and I deal with this too as a Black founder. Sometimes being an American can be an asset. Sometimes it can hurt me, but I do know I do have privilege as a man, and I can't imagine how difficult your journey can be or has been, and especially what part of Brazil you come from as well. So she's a gaúcha. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I remember going to Gramado y Canela and Canela in Porto Alegre in 2003. And they were like, you're going to Germany, basically. So tell us about
German in schools there. Florianópolis, there are cities called Blumenau, and it's
exactly.
Yeah, it's very European looking places.
So tell us about your entrepreneurial journey, but also how you used education to make your way to some of the most well-known international institutions, some of the most well-known national institutions currently at iFood, and what that experience has been like for you and how that can be transmitted to this next generation of Black women founders who are here today.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. This audience is beautiful. Chris, let me say, for us women, I think it would be rare if we found a woman with that level of confidence to say that they will learn Portuguese in 3 months and get the job, So just to say that generally research shows that men do have that level of overconfidence. So I think my story mixes a lot with gender, race, economic empowerment. I've grew up in a family of Black activists from the south of Brazil. My whole history, I'm 43 years old, but my whole history has been intertwined with trying to make a case that Black economic empowerment is good for Brazil. Okay, it's good for the economy, it's good for the nation, it's good to strengthen our democracy, it's good for our culture, it's good for, our peace. So my whole life has been evolving around advancing the storytelling. And obviously, data has always been key. I started the storytelling with human rights, right? But I quickly realized that there is no, as Dr. King used to say, there is no full civil rights without the economic rights. So very quickly, I realized that economic empowerment was key. I decided to study economics, is particularly to learn how to converse using that language of GDP, of economic equilibrium and all that. And then evolved from becoming an activist and also working in the IT sector, because that's how the beginning of my journey was. It was where the jobs were. That's how I worked for about 8 years in Hewlett Packard in Porto Alegre. And obviously improved my English a lot because I was always in the United States. With 19 years old, 20 years old, I was leading teams in India, in the United States, Fort Collins. So I've always had a very rapid pace career from a very early age. But I decided to leave Brazil with scholarship to do economic development and analysis of economic policy, where I focused mainly on econometrics, learning how to measure the cost of racism, learning how to measure the costs of economic inequality in the job market, and the economic returns that we can have from having more diverse universities. So when I decided to do PhD, we didn't have affirmative action. When I decided to do my master's, we didn't have affirmative actions law. So I was in the middle of that debate, and I wanted to contribute with more economic arguments on why we should have affirmative actions. Fast forward, we have graduated about 1 million Black people with affirmative action. So we have put through thousands and thousands and thousands. So there is not about pipeline anymore. It's how do we now take advantage of this talent base that we have always had, but now they have certificates to prove it. And so right after the PhD, IDB invited me to work with them. I was fortunate to be an economist, fluent in English, fluent in Spanish, and also be very confident as well. And I was handpicked by the executive vice president of the IDB to then be a mentee to her. Right. And that was really good for my career, because people did not understand why did the EVP picked her. And people came to ask me, why were you picked as mentee? I was like, ask her, not me, you know. So just to see the level of underestimation that particularly Black women face in the corporate world, in the financial sector. So I don't see racism anymore as the way I experience today and have been in the last years is not anymore confrontational, aggressive. It's really, wow, you have a PhD? Wow, you are the EVP. Wow, you are the, you know, it's always this wow, 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 you know, as if like, it's like, I always say it's a whale with horns, you know, so exotic to have achieved so much. So, and in the IDB, the amazing thing as being an economist there, right? And not having done anthropology or sociology or more humanities, is because then they put you in the preparation of the loans. And I led a few loans and technical cooperations that were precisely to fund national plans of race equality, of gender equality, of building schools in indigenous communities, of building centers for women who have faced violence, launching programs for Afro entrepreneurs in Brazil. And I was the one in charge of helping the board see the return on investment. So I was the one in charge of the calculation of the cost-benefit analysis of the social investments they were making. And the amazing thing that I've learned was once you are able to make that case, you become very irresistible. Both in the corporate world, in the development world, you become very irresistible. Once you talk about the money that you are going to make by investing in Black communities, by increasing your customer base, when expanding talent that is hard for you to find, and it's even going to be cheaper. When you start making all those things really crystal clear, I learned that I became more and more irresistible. But today you ask the question, and so in general, at the IDB, I was fortunate enough to influence about $500 million in projects at the IDB. That means $500 million with some sort of results related to reducing inequalities. And for me today, my whole objective, wherever I am, is to tackle inequality. Social, racial is the primary cause of social inequalities in Brazil, racial ones. And when I explain, and when I get to a company like iFood, which primary focus is to generate dividends to its shareholders. Any company, right? It's the primary. And my role there, it was firstly to make a case, look, we can make money and also reduce inequalities at the same time. And when we reduce inequalities, we can make even more money. My whole objective is to show that with numbers. So just to give you an example, iFood today, we have 50 million customers. We do 1 billion deliveries per year. We represent 0.5 percentage point of the Brazilian GDP, one company. Our customer base, 50 million people, majority are class A and B. We practically serve more than 90% of the class A and B in Brazil. Everybody has iFood, like the vast majority do purchases. However, the people who serve those customers, the vast majority is class C and D, and Black and women. So we have 400,000 establishments that produces food, sell food to that customer base. And we have 1 million delivery workers. 7 out of 10 are Black and brown. So when I came in and I said, look, if we can accelerate progress of the delivery workers and of those restaurants that are producing, we are going to be making more money from the commissions. We are going to make the drivers more productive and happier. We are going to increase their purchasing power and increase of their families. So we will be able to exponentially increase our customer base. It's not going to be confined to a segment, a class. And we are going to ensure that we can economically continuously grow within this market. And at the same time, all of these are going to we're going to undeniably have a social impact. And when I realized that all this ecosystem was before me, I said, if I can do that, redirecting capital allocation from the company, from things that don't generate social impact to things that do generate social impact and reduce inequality, I will be on to my biggest racial equity and economic empowerment, Black economic empowerment program that I have ever influenced in my life. And that's precisely what I did. I created the Vice Presidency for Social Impact. And most of the millions that I direct towards education for drivers, upskilling, social, workers' condition, safety, better wages, valuing and respect and combating discrimination against the workers. And on the other hand, on an acceleration program for Black and brown restaurants. So that's that's how, in general, I've been working so far, and I think I'll close and give the mic to you, Leo, because I think my main message is to become irresistible. This topic for us to do more in contexts where there is a white hegemony. Where it's hegemonic, the belief that investing in Black and brown is charity, right? If you want to change the narrative, you need to be able to show and connect that racial equity, it's also a smart economics. It's not just about philanthropy. It's about also ensuring that we can create a double dividend, a social and an economic. So that's where I've been focusing on these days.
Awesome. Thank you, Luana. And before I give this next question to Leo and kind of focus in on him, there are a few more numbers that I want to run through. So we talked about what a unicorn is, a company valued at or more than $1 billion US. And I'm just going to highlight a few that are here in Brazil. And for those of you all who are not as familiar with venture capital, this form of private equity, it's cycles. You invest in a company, it grows for a number of years. They say that a cycle can be anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And then it has an exit or a liquidity event. A liquidity event is considered an IPO or a sale. So that means they go to the United States, usually, and they become a public company and they receive a ton of money from retail investors, common people, right? Like you and I, if you were to go to Bovespa here. So has anyone heard of Quinto Andar? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Quinto Andar, the numbers, founded in 2012. One of the founders went to Stanford, GSB. Valuation is $5.1 billion US. Since its inception, it's received over $755 million US. And it's had 8 funding rounds. Loft, it's another prop tech, right? Valuation $2.9 billion, founded in 2018. They received $788 million US in funding over the course of 7 rounds. And Logi, anybody know Logi? It's a courier service, right? Mail, products, things. Probably a competitor of iFood, who knows? Valuation $2 billion. Founded in 2013, received over $484 million US over 8 funding rounds. Let's go to Colombia, since we do have some Colombians. Who knows Rappi? I mean, even the Brazilians know Rappi, right? Valuation, $5.25 billion, founded in 2015. They've received over $2.2 billion US in funding, over 11 rounds. And Hobby, another prop tech valued at $1 billion, founded in 2019, $396 million over 6 rounds. And many of these founders, as I mentioned before, have gone to study in top US business schools for the most part. And that's kind of where the foundation of Talento Total comes from, because I started to see, like, I always try to connect the dots. Like, okay, this. I'm seeing the same thing. The same schools, the same McKinsey, Bain, Harvard, Stanford. Oh, well, maybe if we get ourselves into these rooms, we can have an impact or gain access. So one of the panelists here, has an opportunity to pursue that path. And when we have candidates go through our program, I'm pretty much hands-on as a CEO because I like the work. I love it. Like when they win, when our candidates win, I win. And when they fail, I fail too. And I feel it. When we get a rejection letter, I feel it just as much as I feel the wins. So I take this very seriously, and I'm very committed to the development of them as individuals and leaders, but also their application. So I read his application. And one of the things that he mentioned is that I want to be the first Black unicorn founder in Brazil. And I was like, yes, because I want you guys to dream bigger than me, way bigger than me. His GMAT score is better than mine. That's a celebration. That's a win for me. There's nothing that makes me prouder than to see someone that I've helped trained, given resources to do better than me. That should be the goal at all times. So Leo, with this aspiration to become the first Black unicorn founder and an opportunity to go to one of these great institutions, where do you see your future going? And why are you so inspired to make this big bet on yourself as an entrepreneur and to have the confidence, maybe like Chris and Luana, that you could even do it?
Actually, Jem, when I try to think of that dream of becoming perhaps a Black unicorn founder in Latin America, it's not necessarily because I think I'm ready to start pursuing that path. It's because I think we're living in a moment when I can look around and I can see other Black people who have fought as much as I did and are continuing like to thrive and to think of like possibilities that could potentially change Brazil. So because I think the whole ecosystem is changing right now, is because I sort of believe that perhaps I can perhaps do that as well. Because I think for a long time, I was in a position where, well, I would look around and I wouldn't see people like me represented. So I thought, oh, hey, perhaps I need to be one of the first, as I'm sure you guys were as well. So growing up like in a one-room shack in Queimado, son of a street vendor and a domestic worker, entrepreneurship was all around. But was this sort of necessity entrepreneurship in which like Black people, incredibly creative, are trying to make a living by focusing on businesses that are not necessarily scalable. But at the same time, like it's very, very creative. And it always pained me that these people who were incredibly intelligent didn't have the opportunity to actually do something as big as their potential, as their like intelligence. So for me, education was a way forward. So I could sort of try to find a way to change my own reality and then try to have an impact on other people. That's why I dreamed of traveling the world from the age of like 13. And I was telling my parents, hey, I'm going to travel the world. And I did so through scholarships, like been to over like 30 countries, all through scholarship work opportunities. Came back to Brazil, joined McKinsey to learn. And it was when I realized that, hey, I've come a long way and perhaps I can do something bigger. We started out Todis out of an idea that came to us when a gay couple was kicked out of a restaurant in Brazil because they were holding hands. They didn't know about protective legislation that would protect them. And the question that we asked back then was, what if we create an app to give access to protective legislation based on location for everyone in Brazil? With a team of volunteers who pulled that out within 5-6 months. The app like grew, was even nominated to Google Play Awards. We're so proud. We're a team of volunteers. We're doing something big. And I was like, hey, perhaps all of the opportunities that I had access to so far could be extended to other people as well. And Todis showed me that I can do that through entrepreneurship. So that's why that was the moment perhaps when I decided that I wanted to move on in doing that. And I think right now, just quit my job like 3 weeks ago to be fully dedicated. And yeah, had a great time helping small bar and restaurants reopen after the pandemic at Urbev. And then build an autonomous retail business unit for Latin America, just launched it like last year. And now as I look forward, I see a great opportunity, especially given recent advancements in AI, to close the skilling gap for 120 million Brazilian adults without a college degree that could potentially have access to a better education and do something bigger in their lives. And because I believe that is possible, I believe it's possible to build a unicorn out of it. And perhaps by extending the opportunities I had access to other people, I'll be able to sort of become this first Black founder of Latin American people.
This will take. All right. I'll come to you.
First of all, thank you for the panel. We Portuguese player Portuguese is muito bom. But I'm Brazilian, Augusto, and I'm 22 years old and just trying to, feel my own path on academics too. So you all came from academics too. So you have a background, a strong background, a technical background. Sometimes they just close the door on our face saying, you are no technical, you're just political. So how do you get this kind of academic expertise to solve real life issues? You were saying about iFood, I work for Google, and we know how big techs are completely hit by trying to do their best, but you're not given rights enough. So how do you use a kind of just like GDP argument so we can create this kind of environment that not just Google or iFood or any kind of company is responsible for the workers or the good of the workers, but all the government, civil society, and private sector too. So thank you. E vocês são demais.
Go first.
Yes, the technical, thank you so much for the question. I think the technical arguments are key. But at the same time, I don't know, we hear a lot of, the power of diversity is so good, the homogeneous teams versus heterogeneous teams. And it's like so far away from the reality of whom you're trying to convince that it just becomes abstract. Then you're just blabbing numbers, blabbing technical, methodological things that have no connection with the business and the day-to-day challenges that the leadership faces. Should we? Yeah, stop? No? Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll do very quickly. So I think on the technical arguments, it's important to connect with the core business. It's important to find that issue, that problem that you want to solve, that social problem you want to solve that has everything to do with the bottom line, the top line, the midline, right? So I think so part of gaining the technical skills, particularly if you're in a company already, is the technical skills that matter for understanding the financials and the operations of that company they work with and making that connection.
I'll let you close it out, Chris.
Close it
And-
out.
and you
okay.
can see everyone.
All right.
We're here. I don't think anybody's
Okay,
running off.
great.
with that.
So, I think she answered directly your question. I'm going to answer a little bit different, with two different things here, like observations that are related to what you're saying. Number one, when I do interviews with people and look at their resumes, like, when you're building resumes out, a lot of people say all the activities they've done, but they don't know what impact that had on the business. That means nothing to me when I look at it. I'm like, so you installed a new system that did boletos. Okay. You're able to process 1,000 more boletos per month. Okay. What does that mean? Oh, well, that helped our cash flow. What cash flow? Well, that helped us actually get 50% more of boletos in. Like, okay, so that was how much did your company make per month? Okay, so that was 1 million. You freed up 1 million of cash flow per month. It has to be that. Everything you do, everything you think about, everything you do, everything has to think about, what is this doing for the business here? There shouldn't be one activity that you shouldn't ask, how does this impact profit or cash flow? Period. Right?
Chris,
And I think we can end on that, right? Want to end on that? All right, perfect.